speaker today is Braden Kowitz of Google Ventures. He's a design partner there and founded the design studio within Google Ventures. I hope this is all true, because sometimes I mix stuff up. Prior to that, he worked at Google for a few years, helping to launch some really cool products. He does terrific work speaking to startups about valuing and doing design very effectively, and I really like the blog Design Staff, which he's a writer. I think it's a really terrific blog. And so here is Braden. Take it away.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Braden Kowitz. I want to talk a little bit today about building design teams, because as designers we know the products succeed or fail based on how desirable they are. And designers, that's our craft. Right? We make stuff desirable. From the skin of the product all the way down to the core of what it is, we know how to make things that people love. But if you look at the conversation in the world of technology, the world that we all live in over the last decade, it's been focused on other things, not design. It's been focused on questions like, how many features can we get into build? And how fast can we ship this thing out? We focused a lot on engineering. And that made a lot of sense, because it used to be very hard to ship products to millions of people. When we built eBay, when we built these products at the very beginning of this decade, it took a lot of engineering work to do that stuff. But now, that's falling very, very fast. And we're seeing something like this. We're 12 people who build a product and ship 50 million. That's crazy. It's incredible. And I think what's happening now is that you see this ecosystem of mobile photo sharing. And there were plenty of other competitors in that market, some with engineering teams much, much larger. And this is the one that was successful. So people in technology are wondering, why? How can I really love knowing how to replicate this. And this was successful because it was the most desirable product. And that question, how do you make desirable products? It's not a question that engineering teams are particularly good at answering. And it's not a question I think that sales or business development teams are great at answering. It's a question that we know how to answer. Designers. And so now when you go and talk to CEOs of startups and you talk to leaders in Silicon Valley, they're asking this question: how do I get great product design? Which is like, makes sense, right? But as designers, like, for a long time we've been in a corner and raising our hands and saying, please listen to us. We know how to build products that people like. We don't have to fail as often. And it felt like no one was ever listening to us. Now people are listening. In fact, they're asking us how to do this stuff well, how to do it better. So, that's awesome. I just marvel at the fact that we've come this far as a profession. And I think it's our job as designers to lead the way, to help CEOs and leaders in companies figure out how to build organizations where design can be successful, where we can consistently build products that people love. So, I'd like you to imagine for the rest of this talk that your boss came to you and asked you this question, or a startup came to you and asked you this question. What would you tell them? What could they do to build an organization where you would love to work? An organization where it's great design would happen. Actually, it turns out this is my day job. I work at Google Ventures. It's an independent venture fund, and it's backed by Google. We've invested in about 120 companies. So I work in this design studio with about 3 other designers, and we help all those companies with product design, with user experience, user research. And well, it's been a lot of fun. So what I'm trying to do today is kind of share some of the things I've learned doing this for about 3 years about what we tell startups and how it helps them. So the first place a startup will typically start is, how do I get a designer? Well, that's a lot, because it's very hard to find designers. And I think that if you're like me, we probably answer it much in the same way. You're like, look, there's lots of skills that you're going to need to build a great product. Many, many skills. No one forgets visual design, which is how it looks. Of course, you need interaction design, which is how it works. You're going to probably need to do some research to figure out what people want and whether your solution actually works. There's some other skills that people don't think about but are often very important, like writing. Since your UI is mostly words, you're going to need to write really well. And as a startup, when you're building something new and have to communicate it to a market the first time, that's mostly a linguistic challenge. How do you communicate all that stuff? UI development is another incredibly important part of the startup, because you're not only doing something at a high level of craft, you have to keep it flexible, because as you iterate over and over again, you need to let that UI change. And finally, product design. You need to know how all these things fit together, how to lead a team that does all this stuff, and how to balance that against business needs. So we would tell startups this, and to their credit, I think they get this. They understand that there's a huge diversity of skills out there in the world, and And there's a huge diversity of skills in the design world. But then they make this mistake. They go to a job board and they write up a job description and they say, we're hiring a lead designer, you have to be good in all this stuff. We have a word for this in the design community. Do you know what it is? Shout it out. Unicorn. Yeah, they're looking for this mythical creature that can come in and figure out what your product should be and then go and design it and then write the code for it and just do everything. So, do unicorns exist? Okay. I think we have enough people in here to do like an empirical study. So, I want everyone to think about how many of these skills that you have. How many of these are you good at? You should have a number from 1 to 6. And if you're good at least one of these, raise your hands and keep them up. All right, lots of designers in the room. This is awesome. This is good end. All right, now if you keep them up. If you're good at least 2 of them, okay, 3 or more, 4 or more, or put it a little bit, 5 or more, 6 or more, hire that guy. You've got a job waiting afterwards. So what do you think now? Do unicorns exist? I think they do. I think there's people that are probably good at all this stuff. But that, I mean, they're hard to find, right? We had maybe 150 people, and there was, I saw 1 or 2 people in this room that claimed to be good at all this stuff. I mean, I've been working for a long time, it's hard to be good at all this stuff. But the real issue is that there's just not enough hours in the day to do all this. Because if you're talking to users, you're not designing the interface. Designing the interface, you're not designing the brand. And if you're doing that, you're not writing front-end code. Engineering got easier and easier and easier, and design is just as hard as it's ever been. In fact, customer expectations are going up and up and up. So now, we really do need a design team. So it may not feel like you need a design team. It used to be that you had 100 engineers and 1 designer, and that was okay. In today's world, you really do need a design team. So here's the exercise that I go through with startups to figure out whether they have the right people on the staff to actually do the work. I look at those 6 skills that we just talked about, and there's more skills. If you're doing game design, you probably need someone that does like illustration and level design and all these other skills, but I think those are a good start. I go through those skills and find an owner for each area. So if you're a 4-person startup, you might look something like this. You know, I might be a designer, I'll be doing visual interaction design. Maybe we'll find a great researcher who is a contractor, and the rest of the sales engineer and CEO are doing the other parts of this. That's a perfectly good way to start a startup. Now, after you can figure out who's responsible for each of these skills, now you can do a real honest skill assessment. You can say, are the people that are doing those things world-class at it? Are they very good? And for me, if this was my startup and I was doing visual interaction design, I'm not a good visual designer, so I would have a very low score on the visual design. And maybe our engineer is great at back-end, but doesn't really love to do front-end work. That's okay. We've identified that there's some gaps there. And then now when we hire, we don't have to hire for this unicorn. We can hire for just those roles. We can say, we really need someone that can do visual design in front end. Or maybe we hire 2 people for those roles. That's how I think about it. That you try to identify these gaps and fill them. And if you've got those people on your team that have all those skills and they have enough bandwidth to do the work, I really think you'll have the team that you need to build great products. That make sense? We're done? Go home? Maybe not. So, I don't think it's just a design team is enough. Here's how many people here have worked at a place where they felt like they couldn't get good design work done. Yeah, anyone know people that have left environments like that? They've left for a new job? Yeah, a lot of people. So I think actually design culture is something that startups really need to think about. And it's for a couple of reasons. Because if you're a great designer and you go and work at a place and you don't feel like you can get anything done, you may leave. You may just languish there and not do good work. But even more so, I mean, we're savvy people. We go and interview at startups, and we can tell if they have a good design culture. What that means is that if you don't have one, it's going to be even harder to hire good people. You should think about this. And I think engineers and designers are famously not getting along. Kind of been this thing that's going on for a long time. And I'd like to change that. I'd like to make that better. And to do that, I think we can go back in time and look at another point in the history of technology where we've had 2 teams that don't work well together. I'm going to invite you into my shiny new DeLorean. And we're going to go back in time to the 80s, where we had Steve Ballmer and his awesome suit coat selling us the very first PC. This was a wonderful time, because we were building more and more things for people. We told our engineering teams, ship more features as fast as possible. Go, 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 go. And we built amazing things. But we started to have this problem. don't know if you remember this. I had a couple of these in my day. We had more bugs in our software. That became a real problem. So we had our engineering team, and they were focused on speed. And we had all these bugs going out the door. So what did we do? We put together another team on the side and say, hey, you're the testing team. And it's your job to make sure quality is high. Like they're shipping stuff as fast as possible. You make sure no bugs go out the door. I think these two teams got along. Not very well, right? Because they are incentivized in different ways. There's absolutely a culture clash between these two teams. And for a long time, they did not get along. What changed was the test-driven development movement. What changed was that engineers expanded what they considered doing their work. They weren't just focused on speed, they became focused on quality. They started doing things like unit tests. Almost every engineer I know today writes a unit test, which, in this model would mean that you're doing someone else's job. Right? So it didn't mean that everyone had to be an expert at testing and software quality, but it did mean that everyone had to be literate in that skill. That's what changed. And what happened when that changed was that instead of software quality being this team on the side and it was their job to do it, quality became everybody's job. Everyone's job in the whole engineering team was to make sure the quality was high. It's hard to underestimate how much that change impacted the way we build products and technology today. So let's go forward in time. What do we have now? We have our engineering and testing teams that are running more automatic, right? We have this culture of software quality in our teams today. What it means is that we care about it, but it's not a crisis like design is becoming a crisis today. So these teams are building stuff again as fast as possible, focusing mostly on speed. And we put together another team because now we care about quality, but in a different way. We care about product quality. So we put together a team called design. We say, if you're focused on speed, you're focused on quality. How do these teams get along? Yeah, not so well. I think we get out of this problem the same way we got out of the other problem. And that people have to expand what they consider their job to include a little bit of the other. That people don't have to be experts in design, but maybe people have to be literate in design all around the team. I think it's interesting, you hear a lot today about designers that code. You've been hearing this stuff? My background's in engineering, and I think that's great. Because if you understand your medium, you understand the constraints, and you can design better for that medium. Prototype in it, it's phenomenal. But I haven't been hearing a lot about trying to find engineers that design, or product managers that design, or CEOs that design, or salespeople that design. Like, we have this team on the side that's the design team, and we're expecting them to understand the rest of the organization. Design is so important now, I think it's time that the whole organization starts to understand design. And if we do that, if organizations have a literacy in design, I think design can be everybody's job. It can be this automatic thing where we don't have to stand up and talk about like how do we build design teams, how do we do this process. It will just become part of our culture. And that's what I mean about building a design culture. But I've been pretty abstract now, so I better get concrete. How do you do this? Like if you're a startup and you want a good design culture, what are the couple things that you need to do? Honestly, I don't know. I've been thinking about this for the past year and talking to a lot of startups and trying to identify the things that I think are like the unit tests for startups, for design. What is a couple habits that if we all learned, it would be a lot easier? I think there's 4 things, and I think they're pretty easy. The first is critique. I've been to design reviews where you put up work, people just like tear it to shreds. You leave the meeting wanting to cry, and you go home and you're like, oh, I quit my job, and that is not a good place at all to work. Yeah, people have had that, I can tell. But I've also worked in places where people are a little too careful. Right? They don't want to share, they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and they don't share a lot of their feedback with each other. And that's not a good end of the spectrum either. So you talk to people about these 2 ends of this spectrum, and they go, what is our culture? We're just like an aggressive culture, or we're a touchy-feely culture. This is just like the way we are and we can't change. And I thought that way for a while, until I started to look deeper inside the design teams at all these companies. And what I found was that regardless of the global culture, the design teams understood how to do critique extremely well. They all did it well. So how is it possible? I talked to people and they said, well, I went to engineering school. They said, oh, they taught us this in design school. Like we had our first design critique and people told us there were some rules. Very simple things that you can do. Like if I showed you a design and said, give me some feedback, you tell me some stuff. But if I said, here are my goals, here are my engineering constraints, and I've been working on this for about 2 hours. And then I showed it to you, I get so much better feedback from that. There's about a dozen things that you can do like that to get better critique. What I love about this is it's totally teachable. I taught it in college. So as a startup, one thing you can do to improve the critique at your company is just to start regular structured critique sessions. Find someone, have them go out and read. There's plenty of blog posts out there about how to do this well, and run very structured critiques with good rules. It feels like a lot of heavy process, but what you'll find is, over time, that scaffolding of that process can fall away. You don't need to do it as formally anymore, and people will just pick up the habits and the culture for doing it, and this will just be baked in. So that's the first thing I think is important. Critique so that we can all get better feedback on our ideas. The second thing is visual thinking. Almost all the stuff we build today is just incredibly visual. Like you could block off all your senses, like put earmuffs on and gloves and use an iPad and just be fine. You don't need to smell an iPad, it works fine without it. Yet, we don't draw, really, anymore. Like, in middle school I was told I couldn't draw, and so I stopped drawing. But I kept writing. I wrote high school and college, and I write today. What I find about writing is that when I write blog posts and I write emails, it helps me think through problems. It helps me think through logical problems. And as an adult learning to draw now, I find that it also helps me think through visual problems. What's so interesting today is we have whole teams of people that were told they couldn't draw in middle school and stopped. Or that are, like me, kind of afraid of drawing now that I've been told I was bad at it for so long. What that does is it hampers our ability to think through these visual problems. And if we're in that disadvantage, then we can't build our products as well as they could be built. So I'll give you an example. I was working with the CEO, he had some questions about his landing page. Thought, I'll just sketch out some options. We'll think by drawing, right? Well, that will improve the way we talk about this. I looked at the table, there was nothing, no problem. I go up to the whiteboard, and it's just like, this is where they got it at Toys R Us or something. It's a really tiny thing. I got out a whiteboard marker, and it's just incredible, like dry, like it's a bone, nothing in there. Start with whiteboard markers. It must be a costly. So I didn't know quick and we kept working, but I just thought, if anyone else at that company had that spark to think about drawing, to think through this problem, I'm pretty sure it would have been extinguished. I'm pretty sure they would have tried to talk abstractly about that homepage rather than draw a couple examples. I think that would be a shame. So one very simple thing you can do is just make sure the materials are there. I know it sounds totally basic, but make sure you have paper on all the tables and pens that work, and whiteboards that are big, enough space to put your product and other people's products and inspiration. I guarantee if you start doing this in an organization and start modeling it for other people, that it will be easier to think through visual problems. To start developing vocabulary for the visual stuff you have in your product, it'll just be easier to talk about. I think that's the second thing we need to be good at, visual thinking. The third thing is storytelling. I was working with a CEO recently, and we were going to work together for a day, but he was so fast I didn't have time to really look at the product in advance. So I told him, I want you to print out some screens of your product. Go from the very first thing that the user sees, probably the home page, and print out every screen that the user sees until you've delivered real value to them. Print it all out, I don't know, 20, 30 pages, that's fine. So he comes in the morning, we lay it out on a table, and like this, it was an early morning, so I went to get a cup of coffee. I come back, and he goes, thank you so much. We haven't started yet, what do you think? That's crazy. Well, he explained for him, he had never really seen his product in that way. He had been thinking about all the features that go in and when they get into a launch, and not about how people actually experience it in the story. I think it's easy for us to pick on product managers and business people this way, but we are just as guilty of this. We'll open Photoshop and look at one screen and go through all the different states of that screen and never pay attention to what the flow of the product is like. So I find myself doing this a lot. So what I think is important about storytelling is that so often when we build products, we focus on these features and screens, and people use it in a very different way. And if we can shape the way we talk about what we're building as stories, then every day the stuff that we do will be much more closer to the way people experience our products. We can use these stories to pitch, we can use them to run user studies, we can use them to evaluate designs. So the way I do this in organizations, I have a hard and fast rule that you never show a single mock-up. Ever, ever. Because people will always somewhere before, and they will always go somewhere after. You always want to show stuff in your flow. And if you can do this, if you can lay it out on a table, I found it's tremendously helpful. particularly for non-interaction designers. Because what it does is it helps you see the whole flow, the whole task that the user has to go through, and then zoom in and step in and look at one page and figure out how that page is in service of that broader flow. And I just like paper because I know it's on, that's great. So, storytelling. The final thing, empathy. And we, as designers, we use this word a lot, and generally people out in technology think it's this fuzzy, crazy word for just being all touchy and feely. But I think we need to do a better job of communicating exactly what we mean by empathy, because it is not at all a fuzzy concept. When I'm building a product, I want to build it to the average Joe. But we, in technology, let's face it, we're weirdos. We're really weird. We probably all have college degrees here, right? It's beautiful and sunny outside all the time. Many of us have multiple smartphones, where the average American just now has one smartphone. Like, our experience of life is just so different. We're a couple standard deviations away from normal. We're in this bubble. And then this other great thing happens. Once you start working on a startup for a couple months, you get so into this individual problem that it's even hard for you to explain to other people in our bubble what it is that you're working on. You have a beer with them, and it's like, what are you talking about, man? Because it makes so much sense to you because you're working on it for so long. So you get even further away from normal. And that distance between where our minds are and where our customers are, that's what we call empathy in design. Now the good news is there's lots of techniques, as you all know, to close that gap. You can look at behavioral metrics, you can go talk to users, you can do user studies, lots of things that you can do. A/B tests. I don't think that everyone in the organization needs to know how to do all that stuff. I do think that they all need to understand that this gap exists, and that it's our job through many techniques to figure out how to close that gap. So those are the 4 things. Like, they sound like a lot, but really, we have to draw a little bit better, give each other better feedback, tell some stories, and realize we're not like the user. That all feels very simple, but I have a hard time coming up with organizations where I think everyone in the organization is literate at these things, is good at these things. Very rare. But I've also found that in places where I've worked that has literacy in all these things, it's been some of the most rewarding work I've ever done. Amazing stuff. So, if you're at a startup and you want this, what can you do? I think you can teach it and encourage it from the top down. That's one way that you change culture. And we talked about lots of ways to do that. I think the other big way that you can change this is to hire for it. Obviously, you're looking for designers that have all these skills, but I think arguably you should be looking for these skills in everyone. If you're hiring someone in marketing, make sure they can draw. If you're hiring someone in a back-end engineering position, make sure they understand that empathy gap exists. So that's how basically I would go and talk to startups about how to build that design culture. Just a couple things. That you can't find a unicorn to do it all. You're going to have to put a team together. It's going to have to cover a bunch of different skills, and you should just look at where your gaps are in your team and start to fill those. And that after you put together that design team, that it's not just their job to make the product great. It turns out that it's everyone's job to make the product great. And in order to make it everyone's job, you have to encourage this design culture. And I think when we do all that stuff, we'll build organizations where design is automatic, where we can build products that people love just as easy as everything else. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That was great. I would like that talk to be distributed as an aerosol over Silicon Valley. Okay, so we have time for a few questions. Anyone?
Yeah. Microphone? I'm gonna get off.
So I guess I'm kind of curious. Like you say hire for these things on like the dev team, and I think that's great. Like I'd love to work with more design-minded devs, but especially like back-end devs, for example. Like I feel like it's just as hard to find like a design unicorn as it is to find like someone who's like ridiculous with server code and is also super product-minded. Up in whiteboards all over the place, right? So I guess like have you seen examples of like that actually being successful? And then how do you like kind of encourage your devs to like really set aside time to like learn all the tools and things that you're talking about?
I do think it's hard. I think it's always hard to build teams and cultures. The way that I've seen it done most effectively is leading from the top, like showing other people that you value these things, and being very intentional about the first few hires, because that tends to set the tone for the rest of the company, and it gets very hard to change as you grow. So, although it may be hard to find 20 backend engineers that understand this stuff, maybe you can find one. And maybe that's the person that you choose to start your team with. I certainly would.
I've never been using this for like start with our cash flow people.
Yeah. I think there's another component that I didn't talk here a whole lot about, trust and respect between engineering teams and design teams. And when that's in place, oftentimes there's a lot of exchange of skills. And people realize that the thing that the other person is doing is a real job, it's a long time to learn. They're very skilled at it, and they have that respect. It's a lot easier to learn from a person that you respect. One way to adjust that is to try to build that respect on your team, and then hope that skill share will pass along. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I wanted to add that the engineers that I work with, the kind of startup engineers I work with, actually, similarly the way that we might have when we were told we couldn't draw, they were told they couldn't design, or that in their last job that their design code wasn't valued. And so I find it actually unlocking that, like, hey, tell me what you think, and helping sort of steer their ideas can be a really good way of engaging them, having them participate. And they got their skills at design as much as we might have ours at coding. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You were saying encourage engineers to also do design and give feedback.
Yeah, and what they don't often, what they're unable to do often is to actually get their ideas in a way that might be directly useful, but they have their perspective that I find super valuable.
Yeah, we do a lot of work with teams that don't have any designers, and so one of the things we've been working on is ways to lead workshops and exercises that let people that ordinarily don't think they can draw start to do things that allow them to draw. But one of the best ways I've found how to do that lately is to limit drawing to Post-it notes, which you can put a couple on a page and try to get people to tell a story, but it's so much less intimidating to draw on a Post-it note than it is on a piece of paper, even if you give them a their template. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. I really appreciate all this feedback. And one of my questions is that we're on a team of 3 designers. We have about 35 engineers that we work with. All of them are very opinionated, and many times their feedback is great, but sometimes it's just like, I don't like it. And that's nice, but we're trying to find a way to balance sort of engineer feedback, which oftentimes is helpful, but sometimes is just plain opinion, right? And that process is difficult. So you can feedback.
Yeah, I find a lot of times how we make decisions about design is I ask things out and I often don't have like a very good answer. For me, it's important to understand when we have data for decisions and when we don't. For example, that color, like, I don't like that color. Well, guess what? We probably don't have any data on what the right color is. So in those absences, I think it's good to set up a policy that you defer to the person that you trust most to make that decision. So if we don't have any data about what the right backend architecture is, our backend engineers figure out what that should be. And if we don't have any data about what the right color should be, we defer to the designer for that particular decision. But oftentimes I think rhetoric wins out here, when really we should be deferring to the person that has the most experience.
I really like the idea that you want to teach or hire for these kind of skills. Encourage that in the culture. If you can't hire for them, can you suggest some sort of real-world examples or exercises that you can use to teach this and build those skills amongst your team?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is about setting up formal processes that can slowly go away. So for example, if you're doing a design review, making sure it's always in a story, or if an engineer has an idea for a feature, making sure they pitch it like you would pitch it in a venture capital deck, or like you would pitch it at a marketing event. That kind of thing can change the way people think about the feature, like just putting you more in the shoes of your users, or thinking through not only how it fits in the screen, but how it fits in the whole thing. So formalize that, and then over time, people will just do that as part of the culture. I think you can do that across a number of different things. If people aren't trying to think out their ideas, come up with a quick workshop exercise where you can get people in a room and say, hey, one of the things we do at this company is like sit around for an hour and draw. Like grab some beers if that makes it easier or whatever. Once you start doing that formally for a while, again, I think it can fall in.
Do you have more of them that involve drinking? I just want to get them down.
I think it's always good to have a beer with engineers.
Drink and draw. That's it. Okay, I think we have time for about one more question. All right.
Do you feel designers are starting to get more respect in the big firms, Google, Facebook?
Yeah, I do. I think like Instagram, which is one example I used, has come up, and Apple has come up a lot as places that do both technical innovation and design innovation well. And now, small and large companies are interested in it. I think the big companies are a little bit like a super tanker, right? You can put the wheel all the way over, and the culture is going to change, but it's going to change relatively slowly. So this is kind of why I like my job, is because at these very small companies, you can get in and change the direction that they're sailing very, very quickly. And I think as a community of designers, we can all do that too. As more of these companies are interested in design, we can advise them about how to set up a culture that's friendly to design, and how to change big cultures that are friendly to design. So thank you all.
Yeah, thanks. I thought that was a really great talk. Great questions. Thank you all so much for coming. Please, you can follow Braden on Twitter and check out his blog and all that. So please take a look at San Francisco_CM for announcements regarding upcoming events. And make sure to gather your cups and things as you go. Thanks so much for coming, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.